You kept her in a safe place so she could be clean.
Yes.
Proof your wife cheated and is pregnant by another man. Will learn to let your past be your past.
What's at stake today?
He's not the only one who has anything to lose. Like, it's my marriage. It's our family.
So this is a family?
Yes. We was in addiction.
Okay.
Heavy.
We're here in court, so we just tell the truth.
Yes. 3-4 months pregnant at that time, and she had a doctor appointment coming up because she said if she go back and the tests those that she's been using, they're gonna take her baby from her. And after that, she went to the doctor, came back, you know what I'm saying, gave me like the biggest hug. You know what I'm saying? Right there, I just felt the connection.
You know, like he would tell me, you don't have to do what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? And I stayed around for that. Like,
in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the atmosphere is defined by the relationship between law and justice, where truth is not emotional storytelling but a structured legal obligation. The families who step inside are not simply searching for biological answers. They are navigating identity, reputation, child support, betrayal, addiction, and the weight of what evidence means under judicial standards. At every turn, DNA test results transform from medical procedure into legal truth, and that truth becomes the dividing line between family unity and permanent separation. Judge Lauren Lake reinforces that when a DNA test is requested, the intention is not punishment but verification. Yet, as many litigants express during testimony, people regret taking these tests when the results end long-standing narratives, expose hidden affairs, or collapse marriages standing on emotional fumes. In this courtroom, genetic certainty replaces assumption, and with it comes a kind of personal reckoning no podcast, attorney advice program, or private family debate could deliver. Result day becomes the moment where truth changes everything, including the legal consequences associated with paternity, custody, and evidence stage in divorce litigation. Where other forums debate morality, this courtroom applies structured jurisprudence, adverse inference rules, evidentiary doctrine, marital presumptions, statutory child support guidelines, and legal custody frameworks. This is why legal scholars often cite Lake's approach as a prime example of the delicate relationship between law and justice, the same balance explored in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast and the Divorce Course podcast, where forensic reality collides with emotional testimony. Observers see that while personal hurt influences the courtroom environment, it cannot determine judicial outcome. The facts must exist independently of pain, betrayal, and family history, because jurisprudence requires separation between truth and emotional loyalty. Judge Lauren Lake guides parties through heavy topics: DNA-based paternity queries, divorce petitions citing infidelity, marital abandonment, adverse inference in Evidence Act arguments when documents are withheld, and allegations of manipulation or cheating stories that destabilize family systems. Yet her approach is not cold. It is restorative in a measured way, intersecting with the spirit recognized in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where accountability is a step toward rebuilding. The courtroom does not pretend recovery is effortless. Instead, it acknowledges the emotional landmines of confirming paternity in households where substance abuse, abandonment, foster placements, and fractured marriage counseling histories exist. The individuals who appear here often present timelines filled with relapse, reconciliation cycles, infidelity, accusations of financial neglect, and pregnancies occurring during separation periods. In the most complicated disputes, the evidence stage in divorce case becomes impossible to finalize without DNA confirmation. Once biological parentage is proven, spousal petitions move from emotional dispute into enforceable legal order. Child support then moves from hypothetical to statutory calculation, where the Supreme Court child support guidelines become mandatory, not discretionary. In this courtroom, adoption disputes also surface. Adoption stories are not presented for sentiment but for legality. Was consent truly informed? Was identity withheld intentionally? Was adoptive placement lawful under jurisdictional standards? Judge Lake repeatedly clarifies that when birth origin is contested, even decades later, the individual's right to genetic truth takes precedence, paralleling debates frequently heard on Truth Changes Everything podcast episodes. The human layers in this court include mothers fearful of losing stability, fathers anxious about biological replacement, partners attempting to reconcile despite intimate betrayal, and extended relatives defending deceased parental reputations. The courtroom becomes the only place where accusation must either evolve into fact or collapse under proof. No rumors, no hallway whispers, no social media debates, only DNA science and legal interpretation. Judge Lauren Lake consistently highlights the fragile line between moral condemnation and legal clarity. She reminds litigants that adultery, addiction, or relationship failure does not invalidate parental rights unless statutory harm exists. Emotional chaos is not sufficient cause to erase a biological father from birth records or legal obligations. The concept of justice in jurisprudence requires fairness even when personal betrayal is severe. Justice here is not revenge. It is accurate identity, lawful acknowledgement, and the stable future of a child whose life cannot be defined by adult mistakes. Inside these hearings, anxiety builds not because scientific testing is unclear, but because absolute certainty eliminates escape routes. The moment DNA is declared, marriage excuses collapse, co-parenting responsibilities activate, and evidence, once theoretical, becomes binding. Testimony about cheating, addiction relapse, emotional manipulation, and past relationship entanglements suddenly shifts into enforceable responsibility. There is no returning to ambiguity once the court announces its finding. The podcast culture that surrounds modern law, the game-changing attorney podcast, the divorce course podcast, and current legal commentary series echo what Lake demonstrates daily. Truth requires confrontation, and confrontation requires due process. The courtroom becomes a public platform of uncomfortable honesty, where litigants no longer negotiate privately through half-truths or protective omission. Here, DNA test results do not merely settle paternal identity. They redefine family titles, inheritance claims, authority rights, and legal accountability. When Judge Lake addresses parties whose storytelling masks shame, she maintains a judicial tone that acknowledges humanity but safeguards legal boundaries. She routinely clarifies that while addiction journeys, marital reconciliation hopes, and celebrate recovery testimonies matter, none of these override genetic fact. The Evidence Act exists precisely because memory, trauma, and defensive reasoning cannot qualify as legal proof. The law does not punish emotional imperfection. It simply demands verifiable truth before altering a child's legal identity. The participants who sit beside counsel tables often come not only with partners, but with extended family, step-parents, grandparents, and biological claimants, attempting to secure rightful recognition. Full episodes of these hearings show adult children searching decades later for clarity about fatherhood, while siblings debate legacy, estate rights, and the portrayal of deceased mothers. Even when allegations feel like a direct attack on family history, the courtroom reframes the discussion into legal accuracy. Reputation is not determined by denial, but by verification. Through this process, litigants frequently confront internal questions. Did I betray someone who trusted me? Did addiction blind judgment and collapse boundaries? Did resentment or jealousy motivate paternity doubt? Did relationship insecurity lead to unnecessary DNA intervention? These internal psychological collisions reflect what jurisprudence anticipates, that individuals often approach the bench not only with legal questions, but with unresolved emotional narratives. From decades-long mysteries to recent infidelity discoveries, Judge Lauren Lake leads questioning with a neutral legal approach, yet with empathetic guidance. Her courtroom is not an entertainment stage. It is a truth delivery system where identity is documented, family names are corrected, child support is recalculated, and legal standing is no longer assumed but proven. This is why the format resonates beyond television, beyond commentary platforms, beyond online cheating stories, and into academic discussion on how modern legal process interacts with human pain. The tension arises because truth changes everything, but no party can control how far those changes reach. A spouse may request divorce after confirmation. A father may pursue custody after decades of absence. A child may gain medical history previously inaccessible. A mother may lose sole authority after denying genetic access. A man who loved a child for years may discover legal non-parent status despite emotional fatherhood. These possibilities make DNA hearings emotionally volatile, but jurisprudence requires that every participant be grounded in verified identity, not assumed story. In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, truth is both liberating and destabilizing. It can repair addiction-damaged trust or permanently alter relational structure. It can open reconciliation or initiate termination petitions. Yet the constant remains. Truth is a legal requirement, not a personal choice. In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the second phase of emotional and legal dismantling begins after initial testimony. Once DNA testing has been ordered, the courtroom transforms into a space less about accusation and more about accountability. Here, litigants who once controlled family narratives lose that control the moment laboratory confirmation enters the record. No matter how many years someone believed a father, denied a mother, protected a marriage, or concealed an affair, the introduction of a DNA test places everyone under the weight of verifiable evidence. That is the moment when truth changes everything, even when people regret taking the test that forces reality to replace comfortable assumptions. The hearing progresses into deeper legal examination. Judge Lauren Lake often references procedural integrity, evidentiary thresholds, and jurisprudential fairness when adjudicating paternity, custody, and entitlement. This is where the relationship between law and justice is dissected. Law requires proof. Justice requires fairness. Together they form a balance that television audiences, legal students, the game-changing attorney podcast discussions, and courtroom analysts reference as the modern example of applied family jurisprudence. During extended questioning, the court evaluates timelines, financial records, communication logs, conception windows, and credibility strains. Infidelity claims are not handled as gossip but as evidence. When a partner admits cheating, the court does not moralize. Instead, it determines how the cheating impacts paternity, child support, divorce posture, and legal standing. In episodes involving marital breakdown, Judge Lake repeatedly emphasizes that while emotional betrayal matters, it does not override statutory parental responsibilities. Infidelity may explain doubt, but only scientific confirmation resolves it. This is the stage where adverse inference in evidence act principles sometimes emerge. When one party refuses testing, conceals messages, withholds documents, or manipulates timeline narratives, the court interprets refusal as potential indication of truth avoidance. Yet, Judge Lake does not punish hesitation. She identifies it. She clarifies that reluctance does not equal guilt, but that evidence, not fear, must guide the courtroom outcome. As testimony expands, patterns of generational trauma surface. Adoption confusion, absent fathers, family reputation defense, secret pregnancies, and long-buried betrayal. These themes mirror real human reconciliations heard in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals admit that acknowledging truth is painful but necessary. In Judge Lake's courtroom, the emotional recovery is not designed through therapy but through legal certainty. The moment a biological father is confirmed, inherited history becomes correctable. Surnames can be legally updated, medical lineage can be accessed, inheritance claims can be recognized, and parental authority becomes statutorily legitimized. For litigants attempting to maintain marriage amid accusations, The evidence stage in divorce case becomes unavoidable. Where a spouse asserts infidelity, financial abandonment, or extramarital pregnancy, the DNA ruling either deconstructs or restores relational trust. When the father is the husband, couples may seek reconciliation within clearer emotional boundaries. But when the father is the other party, the marriage must legally address third-party biological rights. Judge Lauren Lake reminds spouses that while emotional possession is understandable, children cannot be erased for marital peace. Once legal paternity is set, the court cannot ethically remove a biological father simply to preserve romantic structure. The courtroom emphasizes that DNA reveals biological connection, not personal worth. A man may be loving but non-biological. Another may be biological but emotionally absent. The court cannot elevate affection above genetic fact when determining legal parentage. Conversely, emotional commitment is not dismissed. It simply operates under different legal categories such as step-parenting, guardianship, custody petitions, or adoption consideration. This dynamic echoes discussions in the Divorce Course podcast, where legal identity and emotional parenting must coexist rather than compete. In heavily contested disputes, Judge Lake frequently clarifies the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice is not the comfort of one party but fairness to all parties, especially the child whose life unfolds beyond adult apology cycles. She explains that while children recognize affection, the law recognizes biological origin when attaching obligation, access, and long-term legal identity. As the hearing deepens, secondary topics emerge. Child medical history gaps due to unknown genetics, birth certificate amendments, relocation disputes, and multi-household coordination. In some full episodes, adult children return decades later seeking identity clarity after raised by adoptive, step, or misidentified fathers. In these moments, the courtroom functions like a genealogical correction center rather than a conflict stage. Adoption stories transition from emotional secrecy to legal transparency. Where adoption involved hidden origins or inaccurate paternal assertions, Judge Lake reframes the narrative. Identity is not betrayal. It is entitlement. In paternity hearings where affair partners sit just feet away from husbands or wives, the courtroom silently acknowledges that DNA test cheating stories carry emotional volatility. Yet, Judge Lake repositions the discussion toward structure, not humiliation. No child's legitimacy is debated. Only their accurate biological father is. She reinforces that shame belongs neither to child nor parents in the legal result. The shame belongs only to denial of truth when truth was required. At this stage, financial obligations become impossible to ignore. Supreme Court child support guidelines are referenced as foundational. Once paternity is verified, arrears can be calculated, support can be ordered, visitation can be structured, and custody petitions can be drafted. If parents are unmarried, child support becomes standard. If parents are divorcing, support becomes integrated into final decree. If paternity is disproven, previously assigned obligations can be vacated or recalculated against the verified biological parent. Judge Lake often addresses litigants who express panic when the truth threatens their relationship stability. She reminds them that while emotional collapse feels immediate, legal clarity builds future structure. She validates that some couples will remain united and others will dissolve. But dissolution is not failure when built on truth. It is simply reorganization under accurate identity. As testimonies continue, extended families interject with protective claims. Siblings defending deceased mothers, grandmothers safeguarding lineage narratives, uncles asserting estate continuity, and partners challenging narrative accuracy. Yet, Judge Lauren Lake returns everyone to the central axis. Fact, not family loyalty, determines legal reality. She dismantles generational secrecy, not to dishonor the dead, but to honor the living child who deserves accuracy beyond nostalgic memory. In this legal space, Truth changes everything, not because truth is cruel, but because truth is final. The DNA result replaces speculation, accusation, denial, self-protection, and narrative convenience. Whether litigants feel relief or devastation, the court's ruling provides something more substantial than emotion. It provides documentation, legal standing, and identity grounded in fact. This is the turning point where litigants understand that DNA does not destroy families, it clarifies them. Recovery is possible. Reconciliation is possible. Co-parenting is possible. Termination petitions, mediation agreements, custody schedules, each becomes manageable once truth is established. Without truth, families negotiate in shadows. With truth, they negotiate in law. Judge Lauren Lake brings each party to a singular question. Now that you know the truth, what will you do differently? Because the courtroom's function is not simply to confirm biological origin, but to force adult responsibility that aligns with genetic reality. When Judge Lauren Lake reaches the final phase of her paternity hearings, the emotional landscape of the courtroom alters. The earlier fear, denial, and family tension give way to clarity. The litigants have heard the truth confirmed, and the courtroom no longer operates on speculation. The result of a DNA test, whether anticipated or shocking, immediately reshapes legal responsibility and relational identity. This is the moment where the confession-driven narrative ends and the statute-driven consequences begin. Whether or not people regret taking the test becomes irrelevant, because once those results are spoken aloud, the entire legal and familial structure must reorganize. Judge Lauren Lake then redirects the parties not toward blame but toward structure. She repeats her foundational principle: truth changes everything. It changes custody rights, child support obligations, birth certificates, adoption filings, and divorce petitions. It changes how the child will name their father, how schools will list emergency contacts, how medical records will document hereditary conditions, and how future legal petitioners will define guardianship and inheritance. This transformation is not dramatic storytelling. It is legal repositioning under proof rather than presumption. The courtroom enters what legal commentators and family scholars often discuss as the operational zone of the relationship between law and justice. Justice demands acknowledgement. Law demands documentation. Both meet at the moment paternity is established. Even in episodes filled with marital betrayal, infidelity admission, long-lost biological fathers, and cheating stories, Judge Lauren Lake refuses to allow shame to speak louder than legal identity. For the child, identity is not a scandal, it is a right. This is where her verdict tone becomes distinct. She shifts from investigative questioning to judicial instruction. She reminds the biological father that acknowledgement is not the end but the beginning. She advises the non-biological father that emotional attachment does not lose value. It simply adopts new legal parameters. She clarifies to mothers that concealment, confusion, or emotional avoidance no longer govern parental decision-making. Just as discussed in legal forums like the Game Changing Attorney podcast and the Divorce Course podcast, truth becomes enforceable, not symbolic. The evidence stage in divorce case now moves from accusation to verified foundation. If the biological father is the spouse, divorce proceedings can continue with clarified custodial rights. If the biological father is the partner outside the marriage, divorce language must adjust to include third-party parental authority. Judge Lake frequently emphasizes that ending a marriage does not mean ending parental duty. Petitions must reflect precisely what genetic testing has codified. Her commentary on the concept of justice in jurisprudence becomes striking in these closing moments. She explains that justice is not about balancing emotional harm between adults. The law is centered around the child. The child is not responsible for infidelity, secrecy, addiction, or marital collapse. Thus, child support enforcement, guided by Supreme Court child support benchmarks, must be applied regardless of who feels wronged by pregnancy circumstances or relationship endings. Biological fatherhood is not elective. It is obligatory. This closing phase also engages themes familiar to those who share Celebrate Recovery testimonies. Many litigants have confronted addiction, trauma, abandonment, and fractured self-worth during the course of the hearing. Once DNA removes uncertainty, Judge Lake highlights that emotional healing must continue outside the courtroom, but legal compliance begins immediately. Sobriety journeys, recovery commitments, counseling, and reconciliation attempts do not remove legal obligations. They simply provide potential stability to support them. The courtroom atmosphere in this final stage often softens, not because wounds are healed, but because confusion has ended. Adoption stories that were clouded by uncertain paternity now become eligible for lawful closure. If the biological father is present, adoption may be impossible without his consent. If he is legally excluded, adoption may be confirmed. Once truth is spoken, previously tangled identity threads can finally be tied in legally consistent form. Families in these full episodes frequently reflect aloud how different their choices might have been if the truth had been known earlier. Grandmothers speak of raising children without correct medical history. Fathers mention years of attachment suddenly meeting genetic reality. Mothers describe guilt when a partner who stood by them is proven not to be the biological parent. Yet, Judge Lauren Lake insists that the future cannot be constructed on regret, but must be organized under clarity. Her closing instruction always reflects this principle. Once identity is known, a child's legal framework must honor it. Co-parenting arrangements, visitation calendars, relocation permissions, educational decision rights, healthcare consent, all must align with verified paternity. Emotional agreements cannot override statutory rights. One adult cannot simply decide to remove another adult from a child's life because feelings changed. The law claims the child as a protected subject, not as emotional property. When DNA test cheating stories result in reunions rather than ruptures, the courtroom witnesses reconciliation. When they result in permanent division, the courtroom witnesses lawful reconfiguration rather than collapse. And in adoption-related hearings, verifying origin allows adult children to rewrite psychological continuity, not by erasing the past, but by anchoring the present in fact. Judge Lake reiterates in these final moments that support, involvement, and custody are not interchangeable gestures. If a man is proven to be the father, he must support not only emotionally but financially and legally. If a man is proven not to be the father, the court may release him from obligation, but not from the emotional truth that he once believed differently. This careful distinction mirrors discussions led by attorneys and mediators on identity-focused episodes in modern legal commentary. Even when litigants express that they regret taking the DNA test because it destroyed emotional connections, Judge Lake clarifies that the test did not destroy anything. It revealed what already existed. Relationships built in assumption collapse only under truth because they were not grounded in fact. Healing is possible. Restructuring is possible. New parental alliances are possible, but they must operate under accurate identity. Truth in this courtroom is not delivered for shock value. It is delivered for long-term structure. Once the DNA test confirms paternity, Judge Lake transitions into her defining question. What will you do now to ensure this child's life is not shaped by your mistakes, but by your commitment? She reminds parents that co-parenting plans must be honored, that the child will need consistency, that hostility cannot dictate visitation, and that parental titles carry duty, not ego. She underscores that genetic truth requires behavioral realignment. Whether the father is the husband fighting to repair marriage, the long-absent biological parent seeking entrance, or the boyfriend who believed commitment was love without legal identity, each must now live according to the truth spoken in court. As in the dialogues of recovery groups and legal reflections on high-profile platforms, this final transformation echoes loudly. The child now owns clarity, and clarity must govern every adult decision going forward. Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom closes not with emotional triumph, but with documented certainty. The truth does not fix everything, but it replaces confusion with direction. From this point on, co-parenting becomes lawful, child identity becomes confirmed, and every adult involved becomes accountable to a standard higher than pain, verified reality. Here, paternity is no longer suspicion. Custody is no longer negotiation. Parenthood is no longer a feeling. It is a legal truth.